Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now this is the Sapphire HD 6950 Dirt 3 edition. Judging by the name alone, it's pretty hard to guess which extra features or included games were bundled with this aging performance card, but luckily I've managed to figure it out. Back in 2011, Sapphire teamed up with Codemasters to release this special edition GPU. Not only did the card come with a copy of Dirt 3, but the 6950 itself had an upgraded twin fan cooler design as demonstrated here. Just like some of the previously released 6950s, this model also had the dual BIOS switch included. This switch meant that reference cards could be flashed quite simply, in fact, to HD 6970s by unlocking the dormant shaders. Later cards came without this switch, and although it is present here, you just need your own astronomy telescope to see it and the fingers of a 3-month-old child to actually reach it. The idea here is that you flick the switch before flashing the BIOS, and if anything goes wrong, you flick it back to the original position to restore the standard settings. Now despite my efforts, I couldn't actually flash this card, and it seems I'm not alone. This seemed to be a very hit and miss experience back in the day, if various forums are anything to go by. Instead I decided to overclock it. The best I could do was an increase from 800 MHz on the core clock to 870, a 9-ish% gain, and an increase from a 1250 MHz memory clock to 1350. Any higher and I found some of my games crashing or simply freezing. So how well does the 6950 Dirt 3 Special Edition stand up in modern titles? Sorry, I couldn't resist. I'm going to use this opportunity, however, to plug some merch which features Dave himself, but you should feel no pressure to buy anything. In fact, if you want to buy a t-shirt but would rather put the money towards a new PC component, then do that. I know I would. There is a link below in the description if you want to take a look though. Considering this is the Dirt 3 edition 6950, I thought what better place to start. This game is actually very difficult to find these days, and it's been removed from Steam, presumably due to certain expired licenses. Luckily I bought a copy years ago and it is still playable. Now graphics wise, the game holds up very well in my opinion, and although we are using a much more powerful processor than you would have found at the start of last decade, it's no surprise that the 6950 is making light work of this title. All gameplay has been recorded externally as to avoid any unnecessary performance dips, and the other specs include 16GB of 2666 MHz DDR4. The temperature idles at 41 degrees, which is the same at both overclocked and stock speeds, and under load we were still seeing reasonable numbers. We'll return to this game a little later on, as I initially underestimated the card's potential here. GTA 5 came to PC a couple of years after the 6950 was released, so it's no surprise that we're seeing over 60 FPS on average. That being said, we are running with the normal settings and anti-aliasing turned off. Higher settings will be fine if you don't mind closer to 30 FPS, which is honestly fine for me, but the advanced options are still worth leaving disabled. I found that these don't generally add much to the visuals, though they can impact the frame rate quite severely. I apologise if this game, and indeed the others, are looking a little blurry today. My capture device is hooked up to a laptop that is really starting to struggle as the days go on. I also reinstalled the drivers before playing this, as I had a couple of GPU based errors, so this test was performed at stock speeds, hence the 800 MHz clock speed on the left of the screen. Honestly, after going back and comparing things, tweaking this card in 2020 makes very little difference. Moving on, and the problem with the 6950 is the driver support. I'm sure it has the capability to at least start more games than it currently does, and last time I tested one of these early last year, I think, I didn't have as many issues. Mind you, the games were different, and Windows 10 has seen a lot of updates since then, and this could also be a factor into the card's problems. Red Dead Redemption 2, Crisis Remastered, and Horizon Zero Dawn are just 3 examples of games that gave me immediate errors and simply refused to launch. Of course, it's worth remembering that this is now a legacy product as well. The latest drivers are either a beta 16.2.1 Crimson release or a 15.7.1 Catalyst package. Either one will give us the same issues. I would recommend going for 7000 series cards or later, as they are still supported at the time of this video. Now, one game that did run fine was Rainbow Six Siege. Although it's still being updated, it originally released in 2015, so I'm not surprised that it's a little more lenient towards older hardware. You will still get a driver support warning though when starting the game. Now, I tested a couple of maps here and found that they both performed at over 30 FPS with 1080p resolution, and the in-game benchmark test actually told me that we were seeing 55 FPS on average, so we'll go by that. But remember, different maps and game modes will impact things differently. 900p made surprisingly little difference, and in fact the average was 2 FPS less for some reason. I mentioned earlier that there isn't much difference with the overclock here, and I seem to remember that when we tested this card early last year, a standard reference model, and flashed it successfully to a 6970, there wasn't much difference there either, though the percentile figures were improved in some scenarios. I then gave the Crew 2 a quick go, and this required 720p resolution to even hit close to 30 FPS. The motion blur is really noticeable at these lower frame rates too, so it's not a very pleasant experience if I'm honest. I don't always test this game, but it's more demanding than you may think, so it's a good one to pit older hardware up against. Finally, it was time to revisit Dirt 3. Earlier on I didn't really use the highest settings available because going into it I thought the card was going to do worse than it did. After all, why remember this card as something that struggles in modern games when we could remember it as a once high-ish end performance beast, and one that could handle every game with ease? This is the Dirt 3 edition after all, so jumping back in with everything maxed out at Ultra seemed like a good idea, along with max anti-aliasing to remind ourselves of what it could once do. Even with everything cranked way up, the game runs at over 80 FPS, and not only that, it never dropped below 60. I can't remember if Dirt 3 was considered a well-optimised game at the time, but in my experience, the whole series does seem to run quite well on PC. The 6950 Dirt 3 edition still lives up to its cool name then, and honestly, if you can still find a copy of Dirt 3, I'd recommend picking it up, as it still is a lot of fun. And if you could find one of these cards that comes with an unused game code, well, that would be even better. Now, as I said before, I can't really recommend a 6950, but should you come across one cheap, or you're looking for one for a very specific reason, then I recommend a dual fan one like this version here. The reference cards do get very noisy, and yeah, I've enjoyed my time with it, but it certainly isn't the performance tier card that it once was. But that goes without saying considering the age. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed a look at this special edition Dirt 3 graphics card. If you did, leave a like on it down below. Leave a dislike if you didn't. Let me know if you've ever owned one of these, or if you do still own one of these. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.